I'm with Lou Walters today for a second session for the Suwannee County Historical Commission in regard to his life, very storied life. In our first session, we talked about his early childhood and Pearl Harbor and D-Day and then mustering out. So at this point, Lou, you are out of the military and you're moving back east. So tell us some about post-war America and your life as you became employed as a civilian.
Yeah. Well, when I mustered out, and my wife and I were living at home with her folks for the first month or so, and we started looking for a home of our own. And a realtor put us in contact with a nice little bungalow, a little two-bedroom bungalow in the town of Abington, Massachusetts, a very small residential town, very little industry. But people work in Boston, Brockton, and other larger areas, and it was a nice, comfortable little town to live in. And we lived there for 15 years or so, and eventually sold our little home and built a larger one across the street. We bought an acre of land, and I cleared the land myself, and we picked a local builder who built a very fine Cape Cod house with an expanded attic or a dormer, a shed dormer on the back. So we had two good-sized bedrooms and a bathroom upstairs, and with storage areas. And my wife was working. She got a job with one of the local auto sales as a secretary and assistant bookkeeper. And first I started out with a clothing store in Quincy. Well, that didn't last very long. There were too many favorites in the store that were built up during the war, and they didn't want somebody coming back taking their jobs. Well, the law said they had to give me my job back because I left there to go into the service. Well, there was a little animosity there, so I left, and then worked a couple of small jobs here and there, and got on unemployment at what we call the 52-20 Club. There's $20 a week for 52 weeks. And finally I got connected with a job at Bethlehem Steel at Fall River Shipyard in Quincy, Mass. And I worked in the boiler shop and did pipe covering on the marine boilers, and some part-time work occasionally when they needed me in the boiler shop. And however, at Fall River Shipyard, which Bethlehem Steel, when it got towards the end of the year, everybody got laid off. And then after the first of the year, they'd hire you back again. Well, we figured if they did that, they didn't have to put us on the payroll for retirement because you didn't work a full year at one time. Well, anyhow, worked there for a while, and then went to work at another place in Brockton, Massachusetts, in a place that made shoe welting. Brockton was a big shoe city. and a lot of shoe manufacturing in that city. Well, I worked there for a while, and then went back to work, went to work at Armstrong Cork Company in Braintree, Massachusetts. Well, Armstrong, of course, everybody recognizes that name as a flooring and a floor covering outfit. But there was a nice company and good place to work. But they did have seasonal layoffs. And so eventually, my wife and I got a summer vacation and we came to Florida. And we met some young fellows there that I had known up in Abington. And they were working down here in Florida at the Crystal River nuclear site, the power plant. And so they said, well, we need somebody in quality control and electrical QC. Can you read a schematic? And I said, yeah. Well, they said, why don't you come talk to our boss? So I did, and I got hired there.
What year was that? Do you recall?
That was 1943, I think. 43. Yeah. 38, 39. Around 1942, 42, 41, 42. And I worked there until the plant was almost completed. And our boss said, you guys, this job is almost ready to fold up for you. Why don't you see if you can find something else? And he said, I'll give you the time off. So I heard about some people from Oak Ridge, Tennessee, were interviewing candidates for jobs at Oak Ridge. And so I went over and got an interview in the maintenance department as a mechanic. And so they said, well, you got the job if you can pass the physical. So I said, well, and this was getting near Christmas time. I said, well, I have house guests now, and I'd like to wait until after Christmas. They said, okay, you call us and let us know when you're coming. And so after Christmas, our house guests and my wife and I drove to Oak Ridge and put up at a motel, went over and got the physical. And they said, okay, when are you coming back? When are you going to come to work? And I said, well, you give me a couple of weeks. I said, I've got to make arrangements to move my mobile home. And they said, don't worry about that, we'll take care of it. Well, that was a big relief because I heard that was a lot of expense because we had a very large mobile home. And so Department of Energy took care of that. And meanwhile, I went up to Oak Ridge, and at a campground there, I had a small travel trailer. I moved that in there, and I stayed there while my wife stayed down in Florida here to take care of things that were going to be moved. Well, eventually, we found a piece of land just on the other side of Department of Energy property, just, less than a mile from the job site. And so after the mobile home was all set up, and we had a pretty nice setup in a country setting, and nice neighbors, and did a good job. Uh, the, the Department of Energy's Oak Ridge operation was a big deal. During the war, it was one of those areas where it was a closed door. You didn't get in there unless you had permission from the Department of Energy. And so anyhow, that job was a nice job. I worked there for several years, and I survived a layoff, and eventually got that long enough to get some retirement. I got 10 years there, and then during the vacation time, we back and forth to Florida with the friends here in Live Oak, and we found some property right next to our friends. And so the wife and I bought 10 acres, and at a real low price. And had our mobile home. Well, we went over back into Florida and bought another double-wide mobile home. We sold ours up in Florida, up in Tennessee. And then we got this double-wide moved in. And meanwhile, we stayed in our travel trailer while they were doing that. And
so you had retired and taken retirement.
Yeah.
And so now you decided to move back to Florida where your friends were.
Yes.
So what year was that?
1948. 1948.
58?
58.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. 1958.
Yeah, 58. And I went to work for Florida Power at the Crystal River plant. That's when I went to work there. And we enjoyed getting set up and getting the land fixed the way we wanted. We put in some RV sites for our friends that like to travel and come down to visit us. And meanwhile, we did a little RVing on our own too, and joined a group of RVers, and we'd go to various rallies, have a good time. And
your property was not far from Dowling Park,
no,
is that correct?
Yeah, it was only 4 miles from Dowling Park here. And just off the main road, back in the woods. And there's at that time, after we moved in there, 6 months or so later, my wife said, I'm getting stir crazy here. She says, back in the woods, there's nobody around us until summertime comes, or winter time rather, and the people come down from the north. And I said, why don't you go get a job? She says, well, I think I will. And she said, because I'm going to go over and see a friend over at Dowling Park. So she came over and she told her who to see. And she ended up getting a job, and they said, well, we need a bus driver. Does your husband have any experience of that? She says, and it's funny you asked, because when we were retired up in Tennessee, he volunteered as a bus driver for Meals on Wheels. And so he drove an old school bus. And they say, that's great, that's just what we got, an old school bus. And so I drove that for a while. And eventually, well, I just drove part-time, weekends, when the regular driver was off, they'd call me in, and so I'd come over and fill in. And I was the first bus driver that Dick Grillo hired. He was the head of that particular operation. But I enjoyed it, and we got to know a lot of people here. And it was a lot of fun. And my wife worked here evenings and weekends on the switchboard, as they called it, at the reception center at the main entrance. Well, we enjoyed working here, and eventually one of the drivers left, and so they said, "Would you like to drive full time?" And I said, "Yeah," and that worked out pretty good. But so many of our friends, older friends, that used to have these little walkers you had to pick up and move, and then they come out with a walker with 3 wheels on it. That was great. And these ladies figured out they could buy their groceries and hang them on the handles, and when they got to the bus, the driver would put the stuff on the bus for them. Well, I used to kid one of our residents here. She was a sweet person, and she'd sit down or stand down there at the foot of the door and say, "Driver, will you put it on the bus for me?" I'd get up and put everything on the bus. And there was one day we got to Carter House, where she lived, and she said, "Will you take it off for me?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Would you like me to take it inside and help you put it away?" She said, "Would you?" And I looked at her and I said, "Hell no." And everybody on the bus busted out laughing. And she said, "I thought you meant it, Lou." I said, "No, I'm just pulling your leg, just teasing you." Well, anyhow, I did take it inside the door, and left her there. But people joked about that for a long time. And they'd say, "Lou, you going to take it in and put it away for him?" And I said, "No, you know the answer." I said, "I don't have time."
And on the bus circuit, what you would do is they would take residents into town,
Well,
and then you would go on day trips. Would you take them on day trips?
no, I didn't do any day trips with them. Although I did take them one time to Valdosta, to the mall. And I suppose you'd call that a day trip, because they were there most of the day. But one of the other drivers liked to go on that, so he was senior to me on the job, so he'd get that job. And then I would drive just the shuttle bus. Well, that was a lot of fun, though. And
they had a name for that bus, as I recall. Was it the Turtle?
Oh, yeah, they called it the Turtle. And it was slow. It would get you there eventually. I remember one time the church choir was having a special dinner, was after Christmas or something like that, and so they took them to a Chinese restaurant in Valdosta, and I was invited to have dinner with them. And they said, "You can bring your wife too." So I took my wife and we went over. We had a very fine dinner. But I remember coming home, there were 2 buses. There was the old school bus and the smaller shuttle bus. Well, I drove the old school bus, and I remember Pomeroy Carter and Jim Humboldt riding in the old bus with me, And on the way home, something happened, and the air conditioner went off, and the lights went off, and I had a cell phone with me, and I talked to the other driver, and I said, "You stay behind me." And I said, I'm not going to stop. If I can help it, I'm not going to stop anywhere till we get there. Well, we chugged along, and just as we got up the driveway in front of the reception center here, the bus quit, and I couldn't start it. The battery was dead.
Battery was dead, yeah.
Battery was dead. The generator didn't work. Wouldn't keep the battery charged. Well, that was something. But at least we made it. And then, I think another time they bought a new bus, and they sent me down Orlando, somewhere down that way, where the bus came from. I had to take it back there, and it was a weekend thing. So they said, "You can take your wife with you," and or rather, she won't go on the bus with me, but I had to take the bus down there and leave it, and so she could bring me home because we had a nice station wagon. And so they paid our expenses for that. And then later on, I had to go down and pick up the bus. So that was another trip. But there was several bus trips like that till they finally got somebody here that could take care of the bus, and somebody locally. And they had another time, a resident here had a nice BMW station wagon they gave to the village. Well, when there was anything needed to be done on that, Mr. Grillo would arrange for me to take the BMW to not Jacksonville, but Tallahassee. There was a dealer there that he contacted, and they said, "Bring it over." So we went over, and the driver said, "Well," the garage people said, "Well, it'll be here all day. Where would you like to go?" And I said, "Well, take me down to the mall." So they took us down to the mall. We spent the day down there, and I called them later on, and they said, "Yeah, it's ready. We'll come get you." So there were little things like that, you know, that it made it interesting. But I've enjoyed working here, meeting people, and I'm one of these guys, I like people. And I sometimes kid with them, and once in a while you meet somebody that you're not too happy with, but you get over it. But there isn't anybody here that I don't like.
So, how long did you drive the bus through the village?
Oh, several years.
Several years, yeah.
Off and on,
Maybe,
yeah.
maybe 10?
I don't know. I don't remember exactly.
Well, another thing that you've done since you've retired here is I know you've been active in the Episcopal Church. You want to talk a little bit about that to us?
Well, I'm a lifetime Episcopalian. And when I moved from Tennessee to Oak Ridge, we attended Episcopal Church there. And then when we came here, we found St. Luke's Church here in Live Oak. And Father Don Woodrum was the rector. And he hadn't been there too long, but I got a little bit from him, a little bit of history of the church. The church was originally on the other side of the railroad tracks. And that was interesting that they started to move the church without getting permission from the railroad to cross the tracks. Well, they had to leave it set up on cribbing for about a year on the other side until they could make arrangements. But they got a nice piece of property where it's located now. And they built the rectory and the parish hall and the cloister between the parish hall and the church. And Father Don Woodrum got a letter from Bishop Tharp up in Tennessee, and I had been a lay reader and acolyte up in that church in Tennessee, and he wrote to the bishop and said that a good friend of his had moved to Oak Ridge, and that he had labored in the vineyard. That was the way he put it, and he said, put him to work. So anyhow, finally Father Don Woodrum said, would you like to be a lay reader here? I said, well, yes, I would. So I was sort of already broke in, he said, you know the routine. So I did that for quite a while, and until my wife got sick and needed more care, and we sold our property in the woods and came over here and got a nice apartment on the 4th floor overlooking the river. We figured we lucked out because that was, I thought, and we both agreed, that was the best apartment in the village. And I still live there. My wife passed away in '09, and we were married, 1943 to '09. That's a long time. And this fellow says, how long you been married? I said, all my life. Well, I sort of bummed around as one of the residents had said, you look like a lost puppy. And eventually I met a very nice lady that was an Episcopalian, and she wanted to ride to church on Sundays with me. So we rode together on Sundays, and we became good friends until one day I asked her, I said, would you like to be my steady? And maybe not in those words, but anyhow. And so we got to be very close friends until one day I said to her, I want to marry you. Would you marry me? Well, we went down and saw Father Don Woodrum, who said we'd like to get married. He said, when? I said, this Sunday afternoon. And he laughed. He said, all right. But he said, you'll have to get all the papers now. So we got busy, and we went got our marriage license, and I think we had some other things, legal stuff we had to take care of. And so we got a group here at the village to be Suzanne's maid of honor, and got a best man and some others from here. It was a small group, and Sunday afternoon we got married. Well,
that was just a couple of months ago, correct?
3.
That's right. It was in in June the 7th. And
2015.
yeah, and we're still newlyweds.
That's right.
If somebody says, "You're still on your honeymoon?" I said, "Oh yeah, still on the honeymoon." And but we love each other, and that's all that matters. And she moved from her. She had a little one-room apartment, and she moved all of her stuff up into my apartment. And we're still trying to find places where we can put things. But
But that's all going to work out.
that's all going to work out, yeah.
Lou, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. Let's go back just to after the war a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's do a little backtracking and talk a little bit about, you talked about having to switch from job to job and all that, but how was America like after the war? Was rationing really difficult? Was unemployment difficult? Can you share us a little bit about the feeling of America after the war?
Well, a lot of people look down their noses at veterans. I don't know why. But those that had jobs were a little bit jealous because the veterans were going to get back to the jobs that they left, because the law said, if you went into the service and you had to leave a job, especially those that were drafted, they had to give them their jobs back, and a lot of people didn't like that, so they looked down their noses at us, and it wasn't very friendly for a while. And like when I went to Abington to the bank to get a loan on a mortgage on the house I was buying, they didn't want to give me the mortgage. And the realtor says, "Well, you have to give it to him. The law says you do." And they didn't want to do it because it was only a 4% loan. And they didn't like that. They weren't making any money. But when the bank president said, "No, we don't want the loan," he said, "The realtor says you have to take it. If you don't, I'm going to turn you into the government." And they said, "Well, all right." But later on, when I wanted to make some improvements on my house, they didn't want to do it. They didn't want to give me any money to do it because they would have still been on at 4%. So I went to another bank locally, a man that knew me, a credit union. Asked him if he'd like to have my mortgage. He said, "Absolutely, Lou. Tell me about it." And I told him. He says, "You go pay off the loan. We'll give you a check. You go pay off the loan and come down here and we'll sign all the papers." And I got along fine with them. No problems.
And that was your little bungalow, your first house?
Yeah.
And how was your transportation at that time? I believe you bought your first car around there?
Well, my wife had a 1936 Ford Coupe that a school teacher in Brockton, Mass. had. And in the wintertime, she didn't drive it. She put it up in the barn. They put it up on blocks, so it didn't get any driving during the winter. Well, my wife's cousin bought it. And then he went in the service. And so then my wife's father bought it from him and gave it to Mary. And so it was a nice little car. It was a V8, a business coupe. Mm-hmm. And we had that going, very nice. And finally, Mary got a job as an assistant bookkeeper at a Chrysler Plymouth agency in Abington. Well, we found out we could get a car through them at dealer's price. Well, so we sold the Ford and got a Plymouth Duster in 46. And in 47, Mary's dad bought a Chrysler New York through the agency where she worked. And eventually we ended up with that after he died. And that 2 cars wasn't for us. So we sold the Chrysler. And we still had the Plymouth until later on. We got a Plymouth Duster, another one. We had several different cars. We had a couple of little foreign cars. And instead of paying heavy repairs, we traded in and get something else. Always a used car. But we managed. And I've got a job in Brockton.
So did you drive to work or take a train, or how did you get, how was your transportation for her to get to her job and you to get to your job in the like mid-40s?
Well, I drove with some other workers
Okay,
that
so
lived near
you
me.
could share.
And
okay.
so she drove the car to work, and because there wasn't anybody she could go, and it was over a mile for her to walk along the highway, sidewalk on one side of the road. But so she drove the car, and I rode with some of my co-workers. And worked in Brockton, and worked for a short period of time as a salesman and with Singer Sewing Machine Company. And in Brockton. And I'd take a small sewing machine and a cabinet, and I got a call for somebody, some lady had an old treadle machine that wasn't working right. I'd go out and I'd take the machine, her machine, take the head, put that in the car and take in a nice new electric machine and leave it there with her. Well, I'd leave it there for about a month. And I'd go back to get it, and she'd say, "No, I don't want to get rid of this." And I said, "All right, we'll give you credit on the old machine." And I sold several machines that way. And it was a pretty sneaky way to do it, but
Well, it's a good business plan.
that was a good plan, yeah. And then things dropped off when business dropped off, so, well.
Well, as America was retooling, you know, from making
Yeah,
tanks
from
and bombs
yeah.
and guns, were items, were you able to get, you know, appliances, were you able to get clothes after the war?
Well, when I got out of the service, there was a dealer in town. I needed an electric stove and a refrigerator. Well, he had 2 of those things in his showroom. And first he says, "I can't sell them. That's my showroom stuff." I said, "Well, I need both of them, a stove and a thing." Eventually, he found out he could get a new stove and a new refrigerator from the dealer, from the wholesaler. So he let me have that refrigerator and that stove at a good price. And so we were lucky. We had something to put into the house. And it was wired for electric, so that was a real help.
Because otherwise you would have had a long wait, do you believe?
Yeah.
Yes, because they just weren't any,
Yeah,
the factories were having to retool.
Getting rid of that stuff and getting ready for civilian stuff. Well, things worked out pretty good for us as far as that was concerned. And Abington was a nice little town. It was just a residential town. They had, it was only 4 miles from Brockton, and not very far from Quincy. And Plymouth, it was sort of in between Plymouth and Brockton and Quincy. And not far from the Cape. So it was a good little place to live. But the jobs were not very plentiful. So I got a job. I worked wherever I could find a job. That was a whole year, just about a whole year, I was on unemployment. The 52-20 club, they call it.
All right.
$20 a week for 52 weeks. And there was a lot of people on that. Every day I went over to sign up, there was a long line. And that was 5 days a week. So there was a lot of unemployment. All veterans coming back from the service. And you had to be a veteran to get on that 52-20 club.
Well, I want to thank you again for allowing us to interview you, and we will provide a copy of this for you, obviously. Is there anything you'd like to sum up with as we go off air?
I want to say one thing about this village. This is the best kept secret in the state of Florida. There isn't any place I'd rather live than right here. They're good to us. The apartments, even though the building we're in is one of the older ones, and it has its problems, but everybody here is just like one big family. And there's squabbles back and forth just like families. And the food is good here. Fortunately, I like to cook. I know how to cook, and I like to cook. And my wife, she says, "You do the cooking, I'll wash the dishes." So that's our plan. And we're enjoying married life just like we'd been together all our lives. She's a real lover. And we go shopping once a week or so, go down to Publix or wherever we want to go. And we have a good life together.
Well, I wish you many years of happiness, and again, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us and share with us.
I can't believe when people ask me how old I am.
Tell us one more time. Tell us one more time your birthday.
100.
And how many?
My birthday is February 4th. I was born in 1919. And I'm getting there. I'm working on 100.
Okay.
And I've got 4 more years to go.
Well, best of luck to you, and thank you again.
Thank you.